Before we get into how a retired school librarian from Wisconsin unraveled a web of lies that stretched all the way to downtown Chicago, I want to thank you for being here. If you believe a mother's love is the most powerful force on earth, please hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments what you would have done. Your support helps share stories about the quiet strength that lives in all of us. Now, let me tell you how it all began. The snow had started falling here in Wisconsin just after lunch. A gentle, picture postcard dusting that made my little corner of the world feel even quieter. But 200 miles south, in Chicago, it was a different story. Historic lake effect snow event. The weather app on my tablet screamed in bold red letters, blizzard warnings in effect, travel impossible. And that's where my daughter, Emily, was, 38 weeks pregnant. My little house felt too quiet that night. The only sounds were the soft hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the old floorboards settling. I'm a retired school librarian. I thrive on quiet, but this was a different kind of silence. It was heavy, anxious. I'd spent my life organizing things, books, schedules, my daughter's entire childhood, but this blizzard, this massive, churning beast of a storm, was something I couldn't control. And it was churning right outside her door. My phone buzzed on the arm of the chair. A text from Emily. Still snowing like crazy here. So cozy inside, though. Ben's making his famous chili. Hope you're staying warm. Love you. Attached was a picture of a bowl of chili, artfully arranged next to a fireplace. It looked perfect. Almost too perfect. There was a performance to it that I couldn't quite put my finger on. You too, sweetie, I typed back. Stay safe and keep your phone charged. I tried to lose myself in a book, but the words just swam on the page. I kept looking at the clock on the mantelpiece. 9 p.m., then 9:30. The wind began to pick up outside my own windows now, rattling the old panes, a distant echo of the monster storm down south. I thought about Emily, my brilliant, artistic daughter, who always saw the good in everyone, sometimes to a fault. I thought about Ben, her husband, so charming, so ambitious, so polished, the perfect son-in-law. On paper, he worked for some high-flying tech firm in the city, and he doted on Emily. But there was a slickness to him, a practiced perfection that always made the librarian in me want to check his references. At 10:17 p.m., my phone rang. The screen lit up with her face, a smiling selfie from last summer. Emily. A wave of relief washed over me. She was calling to say good night. Hey, sweetie, I answered, my voice full of a warmth I didn't feel. I was just thinking about you. Is everything okay? The first thing I heard wasn't her voice. It was the wind, a vicious, screaming howl that sounded nothing like the wind outside my window. And then, her voice, so small and thin it was almost lost in the static. Mom? The single word was a shard of ice in my gut. This wasn't a good night call. Emily? Honey, what's wrong? I can barely hear you. Mom, the car, it just stopped. Her teeth were chattering, the sound of frantic, desperate rhythm over the line. We were on the highway. Where's Ben? Put him on the phone. Honey, a sob, a raw, terrified sound that ripped through the static and straight into my heart. He's gone, Mom. He went to get help. An hour ago, he told me to stay here. My blood ran cold. He left you? In this blizzard? On the highway? My librarian's calm was fracturing, the cracks spreading fast. Emily, what's your mile marker? Can you see any signs? Then came the words that stopped my world from turning. Mom, she gasped, her voice tightening with a new, sharper pain. Something's wrong. It hurts. Mom, I think the baby's coming. I shot up from my chair, the book falling to the floor with a dull thud. Okay, Emily, okay, honey. Just breathe. We're going to handle this. Tell me exactly where you are. An off-ramp, I-294. I think it said, O'Hare? Her voice was getting weaker, dissolving into the roar of the wind. It's so cold. Mom, I can't feel my feet. I'm coming. Emily, I'm on my way. You just hold on. Do you hear me? You hold on. But all I heard was a final, desperate cry, a sickening crackle of static. And then, nothing. Dead silence. The call had dropped. The silence that rushed in to fill the void was the most terrifying sound I had ever heard. For a single, Paralyzed second. I stood in the middle of my warm, safe living room. Then, the librarian took over. The part of me that knew how to find information, make a plan, and execute it. Panic was a luxury I couldn't afford. My daughter's life, and my grandchild's, depended on what I did in the next 5 minutes. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I moved. Keys, wallet, the winter emergency kit. My old SUV, usually so steadfast, protested as the engine turned over. Its groan barely audible above the shriek of the wind. Pulling out of my driveway. The world dissolved. It wasn't just snowing anymore, it was a swirling, blinding vortex of white. The gentle, familiar curves of my rural Wisconsin road had vanished, replaced by an abstract landscape of snow and darkness. My headlights carved a pathetic, 10-foot tunnel into the chaos, and I drove into it, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. The first 20 miles were a battle of memory and instinct. I knew these roads like the back of my hand, every dip and turn a part of my daily life. But the blizzard was erasing them, burying them under a thick, indifferent blanket. The windshield wipers fought a frantic, losing battle against the onslaught. Their rhythmic thump-thump a weak heartbeat against the storm's roar. My mind, the librarian's mind, tried to impose order on the chaos. 200 miles. At this speed, maybe 7, 8 hours, if the roads are even open. She said I-294. Near O'Hare. That's the tri-state tollway. It will be a priority for the plows. Maybe. My thoughts were a desperate negotiation with reality. I kept grabbing my phone from the passenger seat, trying to dial 911. But the screen just showed, no service. Out here, between the sleepy towns and frozen cornfields, a storm like this could cut you off from the world completely. The image of Emily's text message from earlier flashed in my mind. The picture of the chili, the cozy fireplace, Ben's making his famous chili. The domestic, perfect scene now felt like a taunt, a cruel piece of stagecraft. What happened between that picture and her desperate call? Had it all been a lie? As I crossed the state line into Illinois, the storm transformed. It was no longer just a storm, it was a physical entity. The lake effect snow slammed into me like a solid wall. The flakes weren't flakes anymore, they were thick, wet clumps that hit the windshield like handfuls of thrown plaster. My 10-foot tunnel of visibility shrank to 5. The road signs, when I could see them, were plastered with ice, their familiar green signs ghostly and illegible. On the radio, a staticky voice crackled through a local Chicago station. All major arteries experiencing whiteout conditions. Illinois State Police reporting multiple accidents. A jackknifed semi has shut down all southbound lanes on I-94 near the state line. My heart hammered against my ribs. That was my route, my one clear path to her. Following a line of brake lights, I was forced off the interstate and onto a 2-lane state highway the map on my phone told me was Route 41. It was a death trap, unplowed, unlit, a winding ribbon of pure ice. Twice, I felt the back end of the SUV fishtail, the tires losing their grip on the frozen asphalt. Both times, I corrected, my movements small and precise. My breath held tight in my chest. Panic is a luxury. Panic gets you killed. It was on that dark, deserted road that my phone, for a brief, miraculous moment, found a signal. 1 bar. I stabbed at the screen, dialing 911 with a numb thumb. It rang. 911. What is your emergency? The voice was a young woman's, calm and professional, an anchor of sanity in the madness. My own voice, when it came out, was shockingly steady. I was the librarian reporting an overdue book, not a mother living her worst nightmare. My name is Sarah Jensen. My pregnant daughter, Emily Carter, is stranded. She's in labor. Her car is on an off-ramp on I-294. She thinks near the O'Hare exit. Her husband left her there. There was a pause on the other end. The sound of furious typing. Ma'am, we have blizzard conditions. All city and state services are overwhelmed. I can put out a dispatch. But I have to be honest. Response times are severely delayed. We have hundreds of stranded motorists. I understand, I said, my voice still level. I'm on my way to her myself. I'm on Route 41. Heading south. Is it passable? Another pause. This time, the dispatcher's professional calm cracked just a little. Ma'am, we are advising everyone to stay off the roads. It's not safe. The tollway is a parking lot. You won't make it through. I have to, I said, and the words were not a plea. They were a statement of fact. Her name is Emily. She's in a gray sedan. Please, just try. I hung up before she could argue. Her warning echoed in the cab. Another voice to battle alongside the wind. You won't make it through. For the next hour, my world was nothing but the hypnotic swirl of snow in my headlights and the ache in my shoulders. I thought of Emily as a little girl. So small and fierce. The time she fell off the monkey bars and broke her arm. She hadn't cried until she saw me running towards her. She always waited until she knew she was safe. And right now, she wasn't safe. She was waiting for me. The question of Ben pounded in my head with every thump of the wipers. He went to get help. It was the perfect, logical explanation, the kind of thing a good, caring husband would do. But an hour? In this? Without calling 911 himself? Leaving his pregnant wife, who was in labor. The pieces didn't fit. The story was a book with its most important pages ripped out. Finally, after what felt like a lifetime, I saw the dull, orange glow of city lights reflecting off the storm clouds. The outskirts of Chicago. I navigated through eerily deserted suburban streets, past strip malls with dark, snowed-in storefronts. The city was on its knees, humbled by the storm. Somehow, I found my way back to the tollway. And the dispatcher was right. It was a parking lot. Cars were abandoned at odd angles, buried in massive drifts. But the northbound side, my side, had one lane that was barely, miraculously, passable. I crept along at 10 miles an hour, my eyes scanning the blizzard for any sign of a gray sedan. My mind was a slideshow of horror. Emily, cold. Emily, in pain. Emily, alone. The images fueled me, pushing back the exhaustion that was beginning to creep into my bones. Then, I saw it. A green sign, caked in ice but still readable in my high beams. O'Hare International Airport. Next right. This was it. I took the off-ramp, my SUV crunching through a deep drift. The ramp curved into darkness, away from the faint lights of the tollway. It was completely deserted. And there, halfway up the ramp, almost completely swallowed by the snow, was a dark shape, a car. It was pulled onto the shoulder, its form softened and obscured by a thick blanket of white. It looked like a tombstone in a sea of white. My headlights swept across it, and for a heart-stopping second, I saw the glint of a taillight. It was a gray sedan. I pulled up behind it, my own headlights flooding the car with stark, unforgiving light. The engine was off, the windows were dark. There was no movement inside, just silence, and the ceaseless, screaming wind. Of course, here is the seamless continuation of the story, following Sarah as she reaches the abandoned car. Part 3, The Hospital and the Perfect Lie. My boots sank deep into the snowdrift, the wind trying to tear the breath from my lungs as I fought my way to the driver's side door. It was locked. I hammered on the frosted glass with my gloved fist, the sound a dull, useless thud against the storm's howl. Emily, Emily, honey, it's Mom. Open the door. My own warm breath fogged up a patch on the glass. I pressed my face against it, trying to peer into the darkness. Nothing, just a vague shape in the driver's seat. For one horrifying second, I thought I was too late. Emily. My voice was a raw, primal scream. Then, a flicker of movement. A hand, slow and weak, rose from the shadows and wiped a small circle of condensation from the inside of the window. Through that tiny portal, I saw her eye, wide with a mixture of terror and relief. Her face was ghost white, her lips tinged with a frightening shade of blue. She fumbled with the lock, her fingers clumsy with cold. I heard a faint click, and I wrenched the door open, a blast of wind and snow tearing into the car's frozen interior. The cold inside the car was a physical blow, a dead, stagnant cold that was somehow worse than the wind outside. Emily was slumped in the driver's seat, shivering so violently her whole body seemed to vibrate. Her eyes were half closed. Mom, she breathed, the word a tiny white cloud in the frigid air. I'm here, sweetie, I'm here. I started to unbuckle her seatbelt, my own fingers numb and clumsy. We're going to get you out of here. That's when I saw it. Tucked inside her unzipped parka, nestled against her chest, was a bundle, a dark, woolen bundle. From it poked a tiny, Impossibly small face, still and pale, with a dusting of snow on its dark hair. A baby, my grandson. He was wrapped in a man's expensive, charcoal gray suit coat. There was no time for questions. My mind, the librarian's mind, switched to pure logistics. I scooped the tiny, silent bundle into my arms. The baby was terrifyingly light. I ran back to my running SUV, the heater blasting, and laid him gently on the passenger seat, cranking the heat up as high as it would go. I wrapped him in the thick wool emergency blanket from my kit. His tiny body lost in its folds. He didn't make a sound. Getting Emily out of the car was a nightmare. She was weak, her legs barely able to hold her. I practically carried her through the knee-deep snow, the wind lashing at us, and got her into the backseat. I wrapped another blanket around her, her teeth chattering like castanets. The drive to the nearest hospital was a 10-minute blur of adrenaline and prayer. I kept glancing from the treacherous, snow-covered road to the still, silent bundle on the seat beside me. Please be okay. Please be okay. Please be okay. The emergency room doors slid open and the world exploded into light and noise. Doctors and nurses in scrubs swarmed us, their voices calm and efficient. They whisked Emily away on a gurney, shouting medical terms I didn't understand. A pediatric nurse took the baby from my arms with practiced gentleness and disappeared down a different hallway toward the NICU. And then, I was alone, standing in the middle of a brightly lit, sterile waiting room, dripping melted snow onto the linoleum floor. My heart was pounding, my body was trembling with delayed shock, and I was still clutching Ben's heavy, charcoal gray suit coat. It was damp, and a small, dark patch near the collar was stained with blood. I don't know how long I sat there. An hour, 2. A nurse came and gave me a cup of coffee and told me Emily was stable, suffering from exhaustion and hypothermia. Another came and told me my grandson, Leo, they had decided to name him Leo, was in the NICU. He was premature and his body temperature was dangerously low. But he was fighting, a tiny, 3-pound fighter. It was almost 3 a.m. when he finally arrived. Ben. He burst through the emergency room doors, looking exactly as he should. His hair was a mess. His face was red from the cold, and his eyes were wide with panic. He looked like a man who had been through hell. Sarah, he cried, rushing over to me. Oh my God, are they okay? I just got here. I couldn't, the roads. He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking in a convincing display of relief and guilt. They're alive, I said, my voice flat. I held up the suit coat. This is yours, I believe. He took it, his eyes filling with tears as he looked at the bloodstain. I wrapped him in it. He choked out. To keep him warm. I didn't know what else to do. He sank into the chair beside me, the picture of a distraught new father. And then came the story. The perfect lie. The car just died. Sarah, no warning, nothing. 1 minute we're driving. The next, everything just shut down. He pulled his phone from his pocket and held it up to me. The screen a dead, black rectangle. My phone was already dead. I'm so stupid. I forgot to charge it. Then Emily, she started having contractions. I knew I had to do something. He spoke quickly, his words tumbling over each other in a frantic rush. I told her I saw the lights of a 24-hour gas station from the highway, maybe a mile back. I told her to lock the doors, stay put, and I'd be back with help. I gave her my coat for the baby. I thought I'd be gone 20 minutes. He looked at me, his eyes pleading for understanding. But the blizzard, Sarah, it was a total whiteout. I couldn't see 5 feet in front of me. I must have gotten turned around. It took me over an hour to find the gas station. It felt like an eternity. By the time I got there and called a tow, and then the tow truck got stuck. It's been a nightmare. It was a good story. A plausible story. It made him a hero who had braved a blizzard to save his family. But as I sat there, listening to the smooth, logical flow of his words, the librarian in my head was already flagging the inconsistencies. You didn't have a car charger? I asked, my tone carefully neutral. He shook his head, looking ashamed. It broke last week. I meant to get a new one. It's so stupid. I know. You didn't try to flag down a snowplow? Or another car? Nothing was moving, he said, his voice cracking. It was just us and the storm. It was like we were the only people left in the world. His answers were perfect. Too perfect. They were the answers of someone who had rehearsed them. My own drive, a nightmare of ice and near misses, was proof that other vehicles, however few, were on the road, and every car I've owned for the last 20 years has had a car charger. A doctor came out then, saving me from having to respond. He gave us an update on Leo. He was stable, but it would be a long road. Ben played the part of the concerned father beautifully, asking all the right questions, his voice filled with emotion. Later, we stood together outside the NICU, looking through the thick glass window. There, in a clear plastic box, was my grandson. He was so small I could barely comprehend it. A tiny, fragile bird in a nest of tubes and wires. A monitor beeped softly, a steady, reassuring rhythm. Ben put his arm around my shoulders, a gesture of shared relief, of family. He's a fighter, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion, just like his old man. I looked at his face, so full of what looked like love and exhaustion. He was the perfect picture of a hero. But as I turned my gaze back to my tiny, vulnerable grandson, a cold, hard certainty settled in my gut, as cold as the blizzard outside. This story wasn't right. The book was beautifully bound, but the plot had holes you could drive a snowplow through, and I, the librarian, was going to find them. Of course, the immediate crisis has passed, and now, in the quiet aftermath, the real story begins to surface. Here is part 4. Part 4. Cracks in the facade. The blizzard blew itself out 2 days later, leaving behind a city buried in an unnatural, beautiful silence. Chicago was a landscape of sculpted snow and abandoned cars, slowly being excavated by an army of roaring plows. Our lives fell into a new, tense rhythm, dictated by the relentless beeping of machines in the hospital's neonatal intensive care unit. I was staying at Emily and Ben's apartment, a sleek, modern place in a high-rise with floor-to-ceiling windows that now looked out on a world of white. It was the kind of place you see in magazines, with minimalist furniture and artfully placed throw pillows. It was perfect, just like the story Ben had told. But as the days bled into one another, I started to see the cracks in the perfection. Emily was recovering, but she was a ghost of herself. Her energy focused entirely on the 2 hours a day she was allowed to sit by Leo's incubator, her hand resting gently on the clear plastic box. She had accepted Ben's story without a single question, looking at him with eyes full of a new, heartbreaking level of adoration. He was her hero, the man who had braved the storm for his family. She'd recount his tale to the nurses, her voice full of pride, and he would stand beside her, looking humble and exhausted, playing the part to perfection. But I was a librarian. My entire life had been spent among stories, and I know a poorly constructed narrative when I see one. I started to notice things, small things. At first, it started with the mail. The building's mailroom was overflowing after the storm, and I offered to bring it up. Ben nearly jumped out of his skin. No, I'll get it, Sarah, he said, his voice a little too loud, a little too cheerful, mostly just junk mail and bills. Anyway, no need for you to bother. Later that day, while tidying the living room, I found the stack he'd brought up, not on the kitchen counter where mail usually goes, but tucked under a pile of magazines on the coffee table. Through the little window of one envelope, I could see the telltale red lettering of a past due notice. Then there were the phone calls. He was constantly on his phone, but whenever I entered the room, he'd end the call abruptly or lower his voice to a tense, urgent whisper. He started taking his calls out on the small balcony, standing in the freezing cold, his back to the window. I couldn't hear most of it, but a few words, carried on the wind, cut through the glass. Words like, "Don't have it yet," and "Need more time." And one name, spoken with a mixture of frustration and intimacy. Jessica. Jessica. The name landed in my mind like a stone. An affair? It was the most obvious, sickeningly plausible explanation. A man with a pregnant wife. A secret lover. A desperate act in the middle of a storm. It was a story as old as time. The apartment itself started to feel like a set piece. It was beautiful, but it had no personality, no warmth. The art on the walls was generic, the kind you buy to fill a space. There were no family photos, none of Emily's paintings, which she was so proud of. It felt less like a home and more like a high-end corporate rental. One afternoon, while looking for a vase, I opened a closet and found it wasn't full of their things, but was stacked to the ceiling with flat pack boxes from a furniture rental company. They didn't even own the bed they slept in. The financial strain was a ghost in every room. Ben would spend hours on his laptop at the kitchen island, his back rigid, staring at what looked like complex spreadsheets. The second he heard my footsteps, the laptop lid would slam shut with a sharp, definitive click. One evening, I asked a simple, innocent question. That tow from the highway must have cost a fortune. I hope your insurance covers it. He flinched. It was a tiny, almost imperceptible reaction, but I saw it. Oh, yeah, he said, forcing a laugh. Everything's handled. Don't you worry about it. Sarah, Emily, bless her heart, was blind to all of it. He's just so stressed. Mom, she'd tell me in the quiet of her hospital room. He's trying to be strong for me and Leo. But I know he's carrying everything on his shoulders. The new job, the baby, all of it. She'd look at him with such complete, unwavering trust, and the lie he was telling felt like a physical weight in the room. The worst of it was at the hospital. We were all standing by Leo's incubator. My grandson, so impossibly small, was finally starting to gain a little weight. Emily was crying softly, her tears of joy and relief. She reached out and took Ben's hand. Thank you, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. You saved us. You saved our son. You're my hero. Ben. Ben wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. He looked down at his tiny son. And then he looked up, his eyes meeting mine over the top of Emily's head. And in that moment, in his eyes, I didn't see the love of a new father. I saw the cold, calculating relief of a man who had gotten away with it. He was a performer, and this was his finest role. My skin crawled. That night, I couldn't sleep. The silence of the apartment was suffocating. I got up for a glass of water and walked into the living room. The city lights of Chicago spread out below the massive window. A glittering, indifferent tapestry. And there, sitting on the expensive rental couch in the dark, was Ben. The only light was the cold, blue-white glow of his phone. He was holding it close to his face, his thumb moving in a frantic, obsessive swipe. He hadn't heard me. I stood in the shadows of the hallway, watching. He wasn't looking at pictures of his newborn son. He wasn't texting a mistress. He was staring at what was unmistakably a banking app. A long list of transactions in bright, terrifying red, and the expression on his face, illuminated in that stark, digital glow, was not stress. It was not guilt. It was the raw, primal terror of a man on the edge of a cliff, staring down into the abyss. He swiped to another screen, and for a split second, I saw it. A text conversation with Jessica. They're going to find out. A message from her read. It's too much. Ben typed back, his thumbs a blur of motion. I'll handle it. Just do what I said. It has to look normal. I backed away slowly, my bare feet silent on the cold, polished floor. I retreated to my room, my heart pounding a sick, heavy rhythm against my ribs. It wasn't an affair. It was something else, something worse. The unease I had been feeling for days had finally crystallized into a single, terrifying thought. My daughter and my grandson hadn't just been victims of a storm. They were collateral damage in a lie so big. I was only beginning to see the edges of it. Of course, after the shocking discovery at the end of Part 4, this flashback is crucial to understanding the depth of the deception. Here is the seamless continuation of the story. Part 5. The Weight of Debt, Flashback. I stood in the dark hallway of that cold, silent apartment for what felt like an hour. The image of Ben's panicked face burned into my memory. I'll handle it. Just do what I said. It has to look normal. The words echoed in my head. This wasn't just a man in financial trouble. This was a man in the middle of a conspiracy. My first, overwhelming thought was for Emily. How could she not see this? My daughter, so smart, so perceptive about people's art and their emotions. How could she be so blind to the man sleeping in her bed? I crept back to the guest room and sat on the edge of the bed, my mind racing. I pulled out my phone and looked at the lock screen photo, a picture of Emily and Ben from their engagement party. They were both beaming, so full of hope. He had his arm wrapped around her, holding her like she was the most precious thing in the world. And as I stared at that photo, a memory surfaced. A story Emily had told me a few weeks after that picture was taken. Her voice full of awe and a deep, profound love for the man she was about to marry. And I realized, with a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach, that Ben hadn't just lied to her. He had constructed the perfect trap. And my daughter's own compassionate heart was the bait. The scene dissolves, swirling into a memory from a year and a half earlier. The setting is a beautiful autumn evening in Chicago. Emily and Ben, dressed in nice coats, are sitting on a bench in Lincoln Park, overlooking the glittering city skyline. An engagement ring sparkles on Emily's finger. This was the story she told me. The air was crisp, and the city lights spread out before them like a blanket of scattered diamonds. They had just shared a romantic dinner to celebrate their engagement, and Emily was feeling that giddy, untouchable joy that only comes from believing your life is about to truly begin. She told me Ben had been quiet for a while, just staring out at the massive, powerful buildings of downtown. She'd nudged him playfully, asking him what the future CEO of the universe was thinking about. He didn't smile, he just sighed, a sound heavy with a weariness she had never heard from him before. I have to tell you something, Em, he said, his voice low, not looking at her. There's something you don't know about my family. About me. Emily's heart had fluttered with nerves, but she just squeezed his hand. A silent promise of support. You see all this, he said, gesturing to the magnificent, glittering skyline. This is what everyone sees. Success, power, ambition, but it's a facade. My family, we're drowning. And then he told her. He told her about his mother, Linda, how the cancer she'd fought a few years back had returned. He told her about the experimental treatments, the endless specialist appointments, the surgeries that had failed. And he told her about the cost. The crushing, astronomical, uniquely American cost of a prolonged illness. He pulled out his phone, his movements slow and pained. He showed her an email from the hospital's billing department. The number at the bottom of the page had so many zeros it looked like a misprint. It was a figure that represented more money than my teacher's salary had earned in a decade. This is just one of them, he'd said, his voice a rough whisper. It never stops. They lost their insurance when my dad got laid off last year. They've drained their retirement. They took a second mortgage on their house. Now, the bank is threatening to foreclose. He finally turned to look at her, and his eyes were filled with a raw, desperate vulnerability she had never seen before. This wasn't the confident, charming Ben she knew. This was a terrified son, watching his world crumble. My startup, this tech deal I'm working on, it's not just about ambition. He confessed, his voice cracking. It's a lifeboat. It's the only shot I have to save them. The pressure, some days it feels like I can't breathe. I have to make this work. I have to project this image of success. Or the investors will walk. And my mom, she'll lose everything. This, right here, was his masterpiece of manipulation. He took his real, legitimate desperation and weaponized it. He wasn't just a man trying to get rich, he was a noble son on a heroic quest to save his dying mother. His long hours weren't neglect, they were sacrifice. His secrecy wasn't a red flag, it was the heavy burden of a man protecting the woman he loved from his family's pain. And Emily, my sweet, empathetic daughter, fell for it completely. She told me she'd started to cry, not for herself, but for him, for the terrible weight he had been carrying all alone. She'd thrown her arms around him, burying her face in his coat. We'll face it together, she had promised him. It's not your burden anymore. It's ours. Your ambition, your drive to succeed, that's one of the things I love most about you. We will get through this. The scene dissolves back to the present. Sarah is sitting on the bed in the dark, her face pale. The photo on her phone is still glowing. I remember how Emily's voice had glowed with pride when she told me that story. She saw him as a tragic hero, and she was the loving partner who would give him the strength to win his battle. But now, sitting in the darkness of his fake, rented apartment, I saw the story for what it really was. It was the perfect lie. A foundation built on a grain of truth, his mother's illness, but cemented with the mortar of deceit. He hadn't shared a burden with my daughter. He had recruited an accomplice. He had taken her empathy, her trust, her unconditional love, and twisted them into a shield to hide behind while he did God knows what. A new, colder kind of dread washed over me. The problem wasn't just that Ben was a liar. It was that my daughter was a true believer. And to save her from the man she thought was a hero, I would have to become the villain who tore her entire world down. Of course, the trap has been set. The deception revealed to the audience. And now, the quiet investigation begins. Here is Part 6. Part 6. The Librarian's Investigation. The days that followed my late-night discovery were the hardest of my life. I had to wear a mask of calm, maternal support, a mask that felt heavier each morning. I'd make coffee, listen to Emily talk hopefully about Leo gaining another ounce, and exchange polite, empty words with Ben. All the while, a silent scream was building inside me. I was living in the enemy's camp, and my own daughter was his most loyal soldier. My mission was clear, but it had to be conducted in the shadows. In the stolen moments of a life now confined to a hospital and a high-rise apartment. My quiet retirement in Wisconsin felt a lifetime away. I was a librarian again. But this time, I wasn't researching historical records. I was cataloging a lie. The investigation began with the one concrete clue I had, the name Jessica. I knew from family conversations she was Ben's younger sister. While Emily was napping one afternoon, I sat in the corner of the living room, my tablet propped on my lap, and began to search. It didn't take long to find her. Jessica Carter had a public Instagram profile. And it was a revelation. The Jessica I had met a handful of times was a quiet, unassuming girl. But the Jessica on Instagram was a different person entirely. Her profile was a perfectly curated gallery of a life they had no business living. There she was, 2 weeks ago, clinking mimosa glasses with friends at a rooftop brunch in River North. A neighborhood where the cocktails cost more than my weekly groceries. A month before that, a selfie of her smiling. A new Louis Vuitton handbag perched on her lap, the kind of bag that costs several $1,000s. Then a series of photos from a relaxing weekend getaway at a luxury spa in Lake Geneva, complete with fluffy white robes and cucumber-infused water. My librarian's brain kicked into overdrive. I wasn't just looking, I was sourcing. I methodically took screenshots of everything, my fingers moving with a quiet, grim purpose. I noted the dates, the locations tagged, the designer names visible in the photos. It was an evidence board, building itself in a secret folder on my tablet. Ben's story was that his family was drowning in medical debt, on the verge of losing their home. But his sister was living like a trust fund baby. The numbers didn't add up. Next, I turned to Ben. His public-facing life was, like everything else about him, polished to a high shine. His LinkedIn profile was a monument to ambition. It listed him as founder and CEO of a company called Innovate Solutions LLC. The description was full of impressive-sounding buzzwords, synergizing next-gen logistical frameworks to optimize B2B asset deployment. It was corporate word salad, designed to sound important while saying nothing at all. He had a professional headshot, a list of impressive-looking skills. But when I looked closer, the profile was a ghost. No employee reviews, no links to a company website that actually worked, no press releases or news mentions. A man running a supposedly successful tech startup in a city like Chicago would leave a digital footprint. Ben had left nothing but a hollow shell. My training took over. I went to the Illinois Secretary of State's official website and searched their business registry. Innovate Solutions LLC existed. It had been registered 18 months ago. But there was more. I did a deeper search on his name and found what I was looking for, a previous company. Carter Logistics had been registered 3 years ago and had been, involuntarily, dissolved by the state last year. A term I knew usually meant failure to pay taxes or file reports. It was a failure he'd conveniently left off his LinkedIn resume. A pattern was emerging, a pattern of facades. One afternoon, Emily was showing me Jessica's Instagram on her own phone. Her voice full of innocent pride. Look how well she's doing. Mom, Ben has been helping her out so much since their mom got sick. He's such a good brother. She showed me the picture of Jessica with the designer handbag. He surprised her with this for her birthday. Emily said, smiling. He said it was important to keep her spirits up. I had to force myself to smile back. To say something neutral like, "That was thoughtful of him." But inside, my blood ran cold. The price of that handbag could have covered months of his mother's real, documented medical needs. This wasn't a brother helping his sister. This was a co-conspirator being paid off. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place late one night. I was up, unable to sleep, just scrolling through online Chicago business journals, using search terms a librarian would know to use: Innovate Solutions LLC. Ben Carter, combined with words like funding, lawsuit, complaint. For hours, I found nothing. Then I broadened my search. I just searched for the company's name in General News Archives. And I found it. It wasn't an article. It was a tiny, throwaway mention in a Society column from 6 months ago, covering a low-level tech networking event. The columnist listed a dozen local startups that had a presence there. Innovate Solutions LLC was on the list, but with a parenthetical note next to it that made my heart stop. The note read, "Currently seeking second-round seed funding." Seeking funding. He wasn't a successful CEO. He was a man with a failing company, desperately trying to find investors to keep his fantasy alive. His entire life was a lie he was trying to get someone else to pay for. I leaned back, the tablet feeling heavy in my hands. I finally understood. The fancy apartment, the lavish gifts for his sister, the projection of success, it was all part of the con. He wasn't embezzling money to pay for his mother's cancer treatment. He was embezzling money to fund the illusion of a successful life. An illusion he needed to secure the real investment money that would be his lottery ticket. Emily and her baby hadn't just been left in a storm. They were an inconvenience that had threatened to derail his entire, fragile, criminal enterprise. I closed the tablet, the pieces of the story clicking into place with horrifying clarity. The quiet dread I'd been feeling for days had now hardened into a cold, sharp-edged certainty. My son-in-law was a fraud. And I, the quiet librarian from Wisconsin, was the only one who had read the fine print. I had a folder on my tablet now, protected by a password so complex even I had to write it down. It was filled with screenshots, links, and notes. It was a digital map of Ben's lies. I had the what, the fake lifestyle, the failing company, but I didn't have the how. And I knew that to convince Emily to break through the wall of heroic fantasy Ben had built around her, I needed undeniable, concrete proof. My librarian skills had taken me as far as they could on public search engines. I needed a specialist. There was only one person I trusted enough to call. My sister's son, Alex. He was a junior at UW-Madison, studying computer science. He was a good kid, quiet and fiercely smart, the kind of person who saw the world in lines of code. I waited until I was alone, sitting in the sterile, beige quiet of the hospital cafeteria. "Aunt Sarah, is everything okay?" Alex's voice was clear over the line, a comforting sound from my world back in Wisconsin. I had to be careful. "Hi, honey, everything's fine. Leo is doing a little better today." I took a breath. "Listen, I need your help with a computer thing. It's complicated. It's about Emily." "What kind of thing?" The curiosity in his voice was immediate. This is where I had to take a leap of faith. When Emily was admitted, the nurses needed to charge her phone. I have her passcode. She and Ben, they share a cloud account for photos and things. I need to know if there's a way to see deleted messages from her cloud backup. It was a lie of omission, a carefully constructed half-truth. It felt wrong, like I was violating Emily's privacy. But the image of her, pale and shivering in that frozen car, burned away my guilt. I was a mother protecting her child. The rules had changed. "Okay," Alex said slowly, processing it. "That's doable. A lot of apps, even the encrypted ones, have a loophole with their cloud syncs if you have access from a primary device. Let me look into it. Can you do a video call tonight when you're back at the apartment?" That night felt like a spy movie. I waited until Ben had gone out to take a call, and Emily was asleep, exhausted from her time at the hospital. I locked myself in the guest room and set up my tablet. Alex's face appeared on the screen. His dorm room a chaotic backdrop of monitors, textbooks, and tangled cables. "Okay, Aunt Sarah," he said, his voice all business. "This is a little gray. Legally speaking, so we need to be careful. But if it's their shared family account, and you have Emily's express permission via her passcode, we can ethically argue we're just accessing family data. He was a good kid. He needed to make it make sense. I didn't correct him. For the next hour, he was my guide through a world I didn't understand. He had me download a remote access program. And then I watched, mesmerized, as my own screen came to life. The cursor moving on its own. Lines of code scrolled by. Files opened and closed. Alex's voice was a calm, steady presence in my ear, explaining the process. Okay, I'm in her main cloud backup now, he said, looking for message logs. Okay. Here's the standard stuff. He sent me a file. It was a long transcript of text messages between Ben and Jessica. I scrolled through it, my heart pounding. Most of it was mundane. Can you pick up milk? Running late. Love you. See you tonight. But the timeline was damning. There were dozens of texts on the day of the blizzard. All from Jessica to Ben. Where are you? Ben. Call me back now. Is everything okay? I'm getting worried. Not a single response from him. His phone hadn't been dead. He had been ignoring his sister. Why? This is good, I whispered. But it's not enough. I know, Alex said. Hold on. There's another data package here from an app called Signal. It's encrypted, but the backup isn't. People get sloppy with the cloud. A few more clicks. A new window opened, and my breath caught in my throat. This was it. This was their private channel. My eyes scanned the messages, and the floor seemed to drop out from beneath me. Jessica. This is getting too risky. Ben. The quarterly audit is next week. They're going to see the discrepancy. Ben. They won't. I moved the funds to the vendor account. It's clean. Just make the transfer to your account like we planned. Jessica. My bank flagged the last one. They asked what it was for. Ben. Tell them it's a family loan. For mom's bills. That's the whole point of the story. Jess. It's our cover. My hands were trembling. The whole point of the story. His mother's illness wasn't just a motivation. It was a constructed alibi. A shield. Alex. I said, my voice hoarse. Can you look at their financial apps? Venmo. Zelle. Anything like that? On it. He said. More typing. A new screen appeared. This one a spreadsheet. It was a transaction history between Ben Carter and Jessica Carter going back a year. It was a river of red. Dozens of transfers. From Ben to her. $5, $7, $3.500. The numbers were staggering. Alex, with the quick, intuitive grasp of his generation, did something I never would have thought of. He split his screen, pulling up Jessica's Instagram feed next to the spreadsheet. Whoa, he breathed. Aunt Sarah, look at this. He drew a line with his cursor. On September 12th, a transfer from Ben to Jessica for $5. On September 14th, Jessica's Instagram post of the new Louis Vuitton bag. On October 3rd, a transfer for $3. On October 4th, her post from the 5-star spa in Lake Geneva. It was all there. A perfect, sickening correlation. This wasn't for their mother's medical bills. This was the price of maintaining the illusion. The cost of funding the lie. The final blow came when Alex scrolled to the bottom of the encrypted messages. To the night of the blizzard. Ben. Had to leave on the highway. Car issue. Might set us back a few days. Lay low. I stared at the screen. The words blurring through a haze of rage. He hadn't even used her name. He'd reduced his wife, the mother of his child, to an initial, an obstacle, a logistical problem that might set us back a few days. There was no panic, no worry, just cold, sociopathic damage control. Aunt Sarah? Alex's voice was soft, worried. Are you okay? I couldn't answer. I just took a screenshot. The stark, white text on the black background. It was the coldest, cruelest thing I had ever read. The shock I'd been feeling for days was gone. Burned away by a pure, cold fury. This was the smoking gun. This was the truth. And it was uglier than anything I could have ever imagined. I finally had the weapon I needed to show my daughter. I just prayed she would have the strength to believe me. Of course, the evidence is now in hand. But knowledge and truth are two different things. This is the moment the quiet war goes cold. And the battle for Emily's belief begins. Here is part 8. Part 8. Gaslighting and the breaking point. I had the truth stored on my tablet. A folder of digital poison that could end my daughter's marriage. But how do you administer an antidote when the patient is convinced she isn't sick? For a full day, I said nothing. I carried the weight of Ben's betrayal like a physical stone in my gut. Watching him play the part of the doting father and husband. My silence a form of quiet, agonizing torture. He'd smile, and I'd see the cold, logistical text about leaving on the highway. He'd talk about the mounting hospital bills with a concerned frown, and I'd see the Venmo transfers for his sister's designer handbags. I knew I couldn't wait. His control over Emily was absolute, reinforced by her postpartum vulnerability and her gratitude to the man she thought was her savior. I had to act. I chose my moment carefully. Ben was out, supposedly meeting with an investor, a lie I now saw with perfect clarity. I went to the hospital and found Emily sitting in a chair by the window of her room. Bathed in the pale afternoon sun, she was holding a swaddled Leo, looking stronger and more peaceful than I'd seen her since the blizzard. The sight of it, so beautiful and so fragile, almost broke my resolve. He has your eyes, I said softly, pulling a chair up beside her. She smiled, a genuine, tired smile. I know, Ben says he has his stubborn chin. Though, this was my opening. I took a deep breath. Honey, can we talk? I'm worried about you. I'm worried about some things with Ben. Her smile faded instantly. Her posture stiffened. Mom, don't. Emily, please, just listen, I pleaded, keeping my voice low and steady. His story about that night, it doesn't add up. His phone wasn't dead, honey. His sister was texting him for hours. Worried sick. He was ignoring her to focus on me. Emily countered immediately, her voice sharp. He told me she can be a little dramatic. He didn't want any distractions. She was reciting a script, a line he had fed her in case this very moment ever came. I pushed on, my heart aching. And the money, sweetie, the life they're living, his sister's Instagram. Ben is a good brother. She snapped, her voice rising. He helps Jessica out. He's been the man of that family since their dad left. And he's carrying so much weight. Mom, the least I can do is trust him. I saw then how deep the deception went. He had preemptively framed every red flag as a noble burden. His secrecy was strength. His lies were a form of protection. He's lying to you, Emily, I said, the words blunt and heavy. I pulled out my tablet. I can prove it. Just as I unlocked the screen to show her the folder, the hospital room door swung open. It was Ben. He was holding a large bouquet of lilies. A charming, apologetic smile on his face. Sorry I'm late. My meeting ran. He stopped dead. He took in the scene, my tablet. The look on my face. The defensive posture of his wife. His charming smile didn't just fade, it was replaced by a mask of deep, profound hurt. He was a masterful actor. What's going on? He asked. His voice soft, wounded. I was flustered, caught off guard. Ben, I was just telling Emily about my concerns. He placed the lilies on the windowsill with a slow, deliberate movement. Then he turned, not to me, but to Emily. He knelt beside her chair, taking the hand that wasn't supporting Leo. Honey, he said, his voice dripping with a pained sincerity that was utterly convincing. Is your mom doing this again? Is she still trying to fill your head with these crazy ideas? Ben, I have proof, I said, my voice rising with frustration. He completely ignored me. His focus was entirely on his wife, his eyes full of sorrow. Look at you, he whispered to her. You just gave birth. You almost died. Our son is still fighting for his life downstairs. And she's in here trying to tear us apart. Don't you see what this is? It's not like that, I protested, but my voice sounded shrill, panicked. He was seizing control of the narrative with terrifying speed. Sarah, I know you're grieving, he said, finally turning to me, his tone one of deep, condescending pity. I know you've been alone since Emily's dad passed, and it must be hard to see her start a new family. But this is obsession. You're looking for conspiracies that aren't there. You're hurting her. You're hurting our family. He stood up, a tower of calm, reasonable concern. He was gaslighting me, painting me as a lonely, hysterical widow who couldn't let her daughter go. He was turning my love into a pathology. Mom, please, Emily said, her voice trembling. She was looking back and forth between us. her face a mask of confusion and pain. Just stop. I have the text messages. Emily, I cried, my composure finally breaking. He called you an obstacle. He said you'd set him back a few days. Ben just shook his head slowly, a sad smile on his face. He looked at Emily. See? This is what I mean. She's twisting everything. Jessica was panicking. I told her to lay low and stop bothering us so I could focus on you. Your mom hears what she wants to hear. It was brilliant, a perfect, plausible lie that turned his own cruelty into an act of love. Emily looked at me, her eyes pleading, the hero she loved versus the mother she thought was losing her mind. The beautiful lie was so much easier to believe than the ugly, terrifying truth. She made her choice. Mom, that's enough, she said, her voice cold. She gently pulled her hand from my grasp. I think you need to leave. The words hit me harder than a physical blow. Ben moved to stand behind her, placing his hands protectively on her shoulders. He was a fortress, and I was the enemy at the gates. Sarah, he said, his voice now firm, the voice of a man taking charge. I think it's best if you went back home to Wisconsin for a while. Emily needs to rest. She needs peace. We need some space to heal. As a family. That last phrase was a dagger, twisting in my heart. He had defined the family, and I was no longer in it. I looked at my daughter. She wouldn't meet my eyes. She just stared down at the sleeping face of her son. There was nothing more to say. I had lost. I picked up my purse from the floor, my movements stiff and robotic. I walked to the door, my heart a cold, heavy stone in my chest. As I stepped out into the hallway, I gave one last look back. I saw my daughter, the person I loved most in the world, being comforted in the arms of the monster who had left her to die. Of course, the confrontation failed, the gaslighting was successful, and Sarah has been cast out. But a librarian always knows there's more than one way to share a story. Here is Part 9. Part 9, The Alliance of Truth. The automatic doors of the hospital slid shut behind me, closing me off from my daughter and sealing me into the cold, desolate night. Ben's words echoed in my ears. We need some space to heal. As a family, I had been surgically removed. The drive back to the apartment was impossible. I couldn't face being in his space. And the 200-mile drive back to Wisconsin felt like a surrender I wasn't willing to make. So I checked into a cheap motel a few miles from the hospital. A sad, beige box of a room that smelled of stale cigarette smoke and bleach. I sat on the edge of the lumpy bed, the thin bedspread rough beneath my fingers, and felt the full weight of my failure crash down on me. I had lost. He had outmaneuvered me, using my daughter's love as a shield and a weapon. For a long, dark hour, I just stared at the textured wallpaper, feeling a despair so profound it was almost peaceful. But then, the librarian in me stirred, the part of me that believes that truth, no matter how deeply it's buried, has a weight to it, a gravity, and that if you can just present it correctly, without emotion, without accusation, it will eventually pull people in. I had failed because I had let it become a fight. He said. She said. I had forgotten my own training. You don't argue with the facts. You just present them. A new resolve hardened in my chest. I wasn't going home. I was going to the 24-hour copy shop down the street. For the next 2 hours, under the harsh, humming fluorescent lights of the deserted shop, I assembled my final report. I printed everything. The screenshots of the encrypted messages between Ben and Jessica, their words cold and clinical. The spreadsheet of bank transfers, which I'd carefully annotated, drawing lines connecting the dates to Jessica's lavish Instagram posts. The Illinois State Business Registry filings, showing his failed company and the hollow shell of his new one. And last, the single, most damning piece of evidence, the screenshot of his text from the night of the blizzard. Had to leave on the highway. Car issue, might set us back a few days. Lay low. I organized the pages into a neat, logical file, like a bibliography of his betrayal. This was no longer a mother's frantic accusation. It was an academic paper on the anatomy of a lie. My final step was the most important. I went to an all-night bookstore and found what I was looking for in the children's section. A thin, worn paperback copy of Harriet the Spy. It had been Emily's favorite book when she was 10. She must have read it 20 times. inspired by the little girl who wrote down everything she saw in her secret notebook. The next morning, I placed the folder of evidence at the bottom of a simple, plain gift bag. On top of it, I laid the copy of Harriet the Spy. On the inside cover of the book, I wrote a short, simple note in my neatest librarian's print. For my favorite spy, you always knew how to find the truth. I love you, Mom. I walked into the hospital lobby, my heart pounding, and left the bag with the volunteer at the main information desk. For Emily Carter, room 314, I said, my voice steady. No need to say who it's from. I knew Ben would see the bag, see the childish book, and dismiss it as a pathetic peace offering from his vanquished mother-in-law. He would never think to look inside. The next 24 hours were the longest of my life. I sat in my motel room, the television murmuring ignored in the background. I paced. I drank bitter, burnt coffee from the in-room machine. I imagined Emily throwing the bag away. I imagined her showing it to Ben, the two of them laughing at my sad little attempt to win her back. Every ring of my phone made me jump. But it was never her. The silence stretched, becoming its own form of torture. The scene shifts subtly. We are now in Emily's hospital room. It's late at night. The only light is a dim safety light and the glow from the monitors. Ben has gone home. Emily is alone. The gift bag had been sitting on her bedside table all day. She had seen the familiar cover of Harriet the Spy and had felt a pang of a pain she couldn't name. She missed her mom, but Ben's words were a wall around her heart. She's not well, she's trying to tear us apart. But now, in the deep, sterile quiet of the hospital night, alone with her thoughts and the soft, rhythmic beep of Leo's monitor down the hall, the wall began to crumble. She thought of her mother's face, the raw, desperate pain in her eyes. It hadn't been the face of a manipulator. It had been the face of a mother terrified for her child. She reached for the bag. She pulled out the book, her fingers tracing the worn cover. She opened it and read the inscription. You always knew how to find the truth. It was a message, a code from their shared past. Her curiosity, the artist's, the spy's curiosity, was piqued. She felt the weight of the folder underneath. She hesitated for a long moment. Then, she pulled it out. She sat up in her bed. The white sheets pooled around her, and began to read. At first, her expression was confused. Then, as she turned the pages, a deep frown creased her brow. She saw the bank statements, the impossible numbers. She saw Jessica's Instagram posts, the lavish gifts, and a sick, cold feeling began to creep into her stomach. She saw the business filings, the dissolved company, and then she got to the messages. She read the cold, logistical planning of the embezzlement. She read the phrase, "That's the whole point of the story." Jess, it's our cover. Her hand flew to her mouth, a choked sob escaping her lips. The noble hero, crushed by medical debt, evaporated before her eyes, replaced by a cold, calculating con man. Finally, she turned the last page, and she saw the screenshot. Had to leave on the highway. The world stopped. The rhythmic beeping of the monitors, the quiet hum of the hospital. It all faded away. There was only the stark, white text on the page and the sound of her own heart breaking. He hadn't even written her name. In the story he told the world, he had braved a blizzard to save her. But in the story he told in secret, she was just an initial, a problem, a delay. The tears that came were not loud. They were silent, hot tears that streamed down her face, dripping onto the damning evidence in her lap. The man she loved, the hero she had defended, the father of her child, did not exist. He had never existed. She cried for a long time. But as the first, pale light of dawn began to filter through the window, the tears stopped. The heartbreak didn't disappear, but it was forged into something new, something hard, something clear. Her slumped shoulders straightened. The look of a lost, confused victim was replaced by a look of cold, quiet fury. She had found the truth. Sarah's motel room. The phone on the nightstand rings. Shrill in the quiet room. Sarah snatches it up. "Hello?" I answered, my voice a raw whisper. A pause. Then, a voice I almost didn't recognize. It was my daughter's, but the weakness was gone. It was quiet, steady, and hard as forged steel. "Mom, can you come back to the hospital?" I held my breath. "We need to make a couple of phone calls," Emily said, And bring your tablet. Bring everything. I walked back into that hospital room not as a defeated mother, but as an ally. The air was different. The tension was gone, replaced by a cold, still calm. Emily was sitting up in her bed, her face pale but her eyes clear and hard as diamonds. She had my tablet in her lap, the screen displaying the damning text messages. She had been over it, again and again, cementing the ugly truth in her mind. She looked up at me, and in her gaze, I saw the ghost of the little girl who loved Harriet the spy. The one who always knew how to find the truth. She was back. Okay, Mom, she said, her voice quiet but unwavering. What do we do first? The librarian in me took over. Not the police, I said, my voice as steady as hers. Not yet. A man like Ben panics about one thing more than jail time: money. We go after his job first. For the next hour, we became a two-person command center. I looked up the corporate headquarters of Innovate Solutions LLC, a generic name for a company that stole futures. I found the name of the head of their human resources department. Emily, with a composure that stunned me, made the call. I listened as my daughter, whose voice had been a terrified whisper just days before, spoke with chilling precision. My name is Emily Carter, she said into the phone. My husband is Ben Carter, the CEO. I have credible, documented evidence that he has been embezzling corporate funds for at least the last year through a shell account belonging to his sister, Jessica Carter. I have bank statements and incriminating text messages. I am prepared to forward them to your internal audit department and to the authorities. Within the hour, the silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Then, a flurry of action. We were transferred to a man in their legal department whose voice was sharp and serious. Emily repeated her statement. He asked for the evidence. While still on the phone with him, I emailed the entire folder, my entire meticulous research project, to the address he provided. We heard the sharp intake of his breath as he opened the files. Mrs. Carter, he said, his tone completely changed. Please, do not speak to anyone else. We will handle this. You will be hearing from us. The first domino had fallen, and it fell fast. 2 days later, Emily was discharged from the hospital. But she didn't go back to the apartment. She and Leo came with me, checking into the motel room, a temporary, anonymous safe house. That afternoon, we got the call. A lawyer from Ben's company informed us that Ben had been suspended, locked out of his accounts, and was the subject of a major internal fraud investigation. Ben's reaction was predictable. A flood of texts to Emily's phone. At first, they were loving. What's going on? My work is calling me with crazy accusations. It's your mom, isn't it? She's trying to ruin me. When Emily didn't respond, the tone shifted to panic. You have to call them back. Tell them it's a misunderstanding. You're putting everything I built for us at risk. And finally, when the silence stretched, his true self emerged. You stupid, ungrateful girl. After everything I did to save you, you let her poison you. You will regret this. We saved every message. Each one was another nail in his coffin. With the backing of a multi-million-dollar corporation's legal team, the authorities moved swiftly. The legal fallout was a whirlwind. Ben, facing overwhelming evidence, did the one thing a cornered narcissist will always do. He tried to save himself by sacrificing everyone else. His lawyer offered a deal. He would plead guilty to lesser charges and testify that the entire scheme was masterminded by his younger sister, Jessica, who he claimed had manipulated him, preying on his desperation to help their sick mother. He was willing to send his own sister to prison to save himself a few years. But he underestimated his wife. The day of the sentencing was 6 months later. I sat in the polished wood courtroom, holding a healthy, gurgling Leo in my lap. Ben was at the defendant's table, looking thin and haggard in an ill-fitting suit. He had lost his polish. He was just a desperate man, stripped of his lies. When the judge asked if there was a victim impact statement, Emily stood up. She walked to the podium, not with the shuffling steps of a victim, but with the confident stride of a survivor. She didn't look at the judge. She looked directly at Ben. For 2 years, she began, her voice ringing clear and true in the silent room. I believed I was married to a hero, a noble man crushed under the weight of his mother's medical bills, a man who was ambitious for his family, A man who, when the time came, braved a blizzard to save his wife and child. She paused, letting her words hang in the air. But that man never existed. He was a story you told. A carefully crafted character you played to manipulate my compassion and hide your crimes. The real you? I met the real you on an off-ramp on I-294. Ben flinched, refusing to meet her gaze. The real you, Emily continued, her voice gaining power, as a man who called his wife, in a text message. An inconvenience, a problem that would set you back a few days. You didn't abandon a wife. You abandoned a liability. You didn't brave a storm to save your son. You left him to die so you wouldn't miss a meeting with an investor. Your mother's medical bills weren't a burden you were trying to lift. They were an alibi, a cover story you used to justify buying designer handbags for your sister while your own son was fighting for his life in an incubator. She took a deep breath, her gaze unwavering. You didn't just steal money. You stole my trust. You stole my security. You almost stole my son's life. Your greatest crime wasn't the fraud you committed against your company. It was the fraud you committed against me. But the story is over now. Your hero character is dead. And I am no longer your victim. She finished, and a profound silence filled the courtroom. She had not only taken back her voice, she had taken back the truth. The scene dissolves to a bright, sunny day. A year later, we are back at Sarah's house in Wisconsin. The yard is green. Flowers are in bloom. Leo, now a happy, healthy toddler, is playing on a blanket in the grass. Emily is on the porch, in front of an easel, painting. She looks happy, at peace. Sarah comes out with 2 glasses of lemonade. Ben was sentenced to 7 years in federal prison. His sister, Jessica, after being betrayed by the brother she tried to protect, cooperated fully with the prosecution and received 2 years of probation. We never went back to Chicago. Emily and Leo came home with me, to the quiet little house where the only drama is a thunderstorm in July. The sleek, empty apartment, the designer clothes, the entire hollow facade of that life, we left it all behind like a bad dream. Emily started painting again. Her canvases, once filled with soft, abstract landscapes, are now bold and vibrant, full of a strength and clarity I had never seen before. She says she's painting her way back to herself. Sometimes, I watch her out in the yard, laughing as Leo takes a clumsy step on the grass. And I think about the blizzard. I think about that desperate drive through the swirling white. A librarian's job is to protect stories. But I learned that a mother's job, sometimes, is to help her children write a new one. Ben wrote a story of lies and betrayal. But we got the final edit. And our story, the one we are living now, is a story of truth, of survival, and of the quiet, unshakable strength of a family that refused to be broken. At its heart, Sarah and Emily's story is a quiet but powerful lesson about the narratives we choose to live in. So often, we fall in love not just with a person, but with the story they tell about themselves, especially when that story is heroic, tragic, and makes our own love feel like a vital, healing force. Ben's perfectly crafted tale of a noble son crushed by medical debt was a prison disguised as a pedestal, built to exploit his wife's compassion. It's a chilling reminder that the most dangerous lies aren't the obvious ones, but those wrapped in a kernel of truth, the ones that make us feel needed. But this story also shows us the antidote, the quiet, methodical power of intuition, the inner librarian who senses when the story just doesn't add up. It's about having the courage to seek the facts, even when you're terrified of what you might find, and to trust that quiet voice inside that says, something is wrong here. True strength isn't always a loud roar. Sometimes, it's the silent, steady work of gathering evidence, of piecing together the truth, and of choosing to believe in yourself when someone is trying to gaslight you into doubting your own reality. It's the profound realization that you cannot save someone whose entire identity is built on a lie. But you can, most certainly, save yourself. This journey of entangling truth from deception is something many of us face in different ways. We would be honored if you shared a lesson you've learned about trusting your intuition, or a moment you found strength you didn't know you had, in the comments below. Take good care of yourselves and each other.